In the summer of 1856, inside an elegant Atlanta home known for its polished floors and generous dinner parties, a secret simmered beneath the silver platters. The guests laughed, toasted, and complimented the unusually rich flavor of the meals, unaware that the cook behind the kitchen doors, an enslaved woman with no name recorded in the archives, had begun feeding the household something unthinkable. But how does a story this horrifying vanish almost entirely from history? And why is it resurfacing now? Before we unravel this chilling tale, tap like, subscribe, and share. Trust me, you'll want company for what comes next. Atlanta in 1856 wasn't yet the sprawling city we know today. It was a place in transition, railroads carving through red clay, new fortunes rising almost overnight, and old Southern hierarchies tightening their grip as the nation edged toward crisis. On Pryor Street, just a few blocks from the busy rail lines, stood a large white house with tall windows and a porch built for showing off. From the outside, it looked peaceful, even enviable, but inside, especially near the kitchen, where heat never faded and shadows clung to the corners, life carried a very different rhythm. The clatter of pots, the hiss of boiling water, the sharp calls from the mistress. This was the heartbeat of the home. And at the center of it all stood a woman whose name history failed to preserve. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every insult whispered behind her back, every rule that kept her trapped. The house on Pryor Street was more than bricks and mortar. It was a stage where power played out in invisible, unforgiving ways. The family upstairs dined on polished silverware and imported china, laughing and discussing politics, business, and trivialities. Downstairs, the kitchen simmered with pressure, fear, and the unspoken knowledge that one mistake could mean punishment or worse. The cook moved with practiced efficiency, her hands never still, her mind always calculating. Every meal demanded perfection, not just for taste, but to avoid scrutiny. And yet, in those silent, sweating hours, something darker was beginning to stir, a secret that would soon shatter the polite facade of the household. By the summer of 1856, the house on Pryor Street had settled into its rhythm, a rhythm that no visitor could see, no guest could imagine. Beneath the clinking glasses and cheerful chatter, the kitchen held a story of fear, survival, and something so sinister that it would haunt anyone who glimpsed it. Little did the city know, behind those walls, the line between life and death was being rewritten one meal at a time. She had no name in the official records, just a shadowy figure referred to as the cook in passing mentions. And yet, reconstructing her life, even in fragments, gives us a glimpse into a world defined by toil, fear, and constant vigilance. Enslaved women in 1850s Atlanta lived with rules that could change in a heartbeat, dictated not by fairness, but by the whims of those holding their chains. Every day was a balancing act. She had to cook, clean, obey, and anticipate needs that were often contradictory, all while navigating an environment steeped in cruelty. Her world was one of invisible labor, where excellence didn't guarantee safety, and mistakes could be deadly. And yet, she was clever. Every movement, every gesture, every recipe was a calculated choice. Survival required more than skill. It demanded a mind sharp enough to hide desperation behind efficiency. She lived in a world of constant observation. The mistress of the house scrutinized her every move, while the children and other enslaved staff watched for signs of weakness. Gossip and rumors traveled faster than the steam from a boiling pot. In such a world, anonymity was impossible. Yet invisibility was her greatest tool. Her hands moved deftly, almost like a performance, kneading dough, stirring stews, arranging platters, while her mind calculated every possible outcome. Every glance from above, every whispered complaint could mean punishment. And behind the rhythm of her daily work, a secret plan began to take shape. One that would turn survival into something unthinkably dark. Even in the oppressive world she inhabited, the cook held a quiet, terrifying agency. History erased her name, but not her choices or the consequences of them. Each day in that kitchen was a careful negotiation between fear and power, obedience and rebellion. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the seeds of a horrific plan were sown, one that would turn the very act of feeding the household into a weapon, leaving a mark on Atlanta's hidden history that would almost vanish forever. Life inside the house on Pryor Street was rigidly hierarchical, a microcosm of the South itself. The family at the top maintained appearances, but their private cruelty shaped every corner of the home. Orders were barked, punishments administered for even the smallest slip. And fear was as constant as the heat in the kitchen. Enslaved workers learned quickly, survival wasn't just about skill, it was about reading moods. Anticipating whims and hiding mistakes for the cook, cruelty came in many forms. Sharp words could sting like lashes, and small reprimands carried the weight of imminent violence. Yet these daily torments weren't just punishment. They were a constant reminder of the power imbalance. Every meal she prepared, every chore she completed, was done under the unyielding gaze of those who saw her not as a person, but as property. It was in this environment that her mind began to bend, turning fear into strategy, desperation into something darker. The cruelty wasn't limited to physical punishment. Psychological games were just as sharp. Constant comparisons, whispered insults, and impossible standards created an invisible cage. The family's expectations were relentless, and any small failure could ripple outward, affecting not only the cook, but everyone in the household. Fear became second nature, a companion she carried in every step and gesture, and yet, amid the oppression, she observed, calculated, and adapted. Every insult, every unreasonable demand became part of a mental map, a way to survive and, eventually, to manipulate the household from within. In that tension, the line between victim and strategist began to blur. In a house built on fear, the cook learned that power often hides in plain sight. The family believed they controlled everything, but she knew otherwise. Every whispered order, every tense glance was a piece of a puzzle only she could see. And quietly, behind the polished floors and cheerful dinners, a plan began to take root, a plan that would turn the household's cruelty back upon itself, in ways no one could have imagined. In 1856, Atlanta streets were filled with the usual bustle: market vendors calling out, children running barefoot, and neighbors exchanging the latest gossip. But behind the closed doors of the Pryor Street house, something was quietly unraveling. The first person vanished without warning a servant. Someone who had likely been too trusting or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The household barely noticed at first. Absences could be explained away, dismissed as errands or visits. Yet whispers began to circulate. Neighbors noticed the sudden silence of someone who once bustled about the city. Friends wondered why no letters or visits arrived. It was subtle, almost invisible, a disappearance that carried no fanfare, but in hindsight, marked the chilling beginning of a horror that would stretch across the long years. Inside the house, the tension was palpable. Questions were asked cautiously, answers given carefully, as if speaking too loudly might summon danger. The cook, ever watchful, remained calm, but her mind was already working, calculating how to keep the secret hidden. Every missing person became another variable in a dark, unspoken equation, one that only she could manage. Neighbors speculated, servants whispered in corners, and the family clung to explanations that made sense on the surface. But beneath the polite facades, the first signs of terror were already taking root, a creeping unease that no one could yet name. The first disappearance was a warning no one recognized at the time. For the household, it was unsettling, yet they convinced themselves it was coincidence. For the cook, however, it was the opening move in a grim pattern, a signal that her plan could unfold undetected. Every unnoticed absence, every hushed conversation, became part of a rhythm she alone understood, a rhythm that would turn ordinary meals into instruments of horror. Food was the cook's canvas and her most dangerous tool. Stews simmered, roasts browned, and pies cooled on windowsills, all under the watchful eyes of the household. To everyone else, the meals were rich, flavorful, even comforting. But beneath the surface, an unspeakable secret had begun to infiltrate the kitchen. No one questioned the taste, the texture, or the unusual richness that seemed to linger on the tongue. The cook had learned to hide her intentions in plain sight, folding fear and cunning into every dish. Every ladleful, every slice, became a part of a silent, horrifying experiment, one that would continue for years, shaping the lives of those who never suspected a thing. It's chilling to imagine. How could something so ordinary, so familiar, carry such terror? The beauty and horror of her plan was in its subtlety. No one noticed the changes at first. The food looked the same, smelled the same, even tasted slightly better than expected. Guests praised the richness, the depth, never guessing the truth hidden in the dishes they consumed. The cook's knowledge of flavor became a shield, a way to maintain control while avoiding suspicion. Behind every simmering pot, she calculated, observed, and adjusted. Each meal was a careful balance of normalcy and concealment, a secret carried in plain sight, binding the household unknowingly to a creeping, unspeakable horror. By the end of each day, the kitchen held a quiet tension only she understood. The household saw satisfaction, not horror, laughter, not fear, Every plate served was a testament to her control, every bite a silent, terrifying confirmation that her secret remained undiscovered. And yet, beneath the rhythm of ordinary meals, a darker story was simmering, a story that would haunt the home for too long. Unthinkable years. Even as the household remained unaware, the city began to murmur. Atlanta in 1856 was small enough that unusual events traveled fast through marketplaces, churches, and taverns. Servants whispered about disappearances. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Stories spread, some exaggerated, some based on observation, all tinged with fear. Yet most of these whispers never reached the family. They were insulated, confident that appearances protected them from scandal. Still, the cook's shadow extended beyond the kitchen walls. Her secret, carried silently in every meal, became the source of gossip and speculation. Those who noticed anomalies, missed friends, sudden absences, or odd taste in food could only guess at the truth. The tension grew quietly, invisibly, a subtle web of suspicion spreading through the city. The whispers weren't just idle talk, they were fragments of a story forming in real time. Some servants noticed that people vanished quietly, always in ways that seemed natural to outsiders. Travelers passing through Atlanta might mention strange rumors, while enslaved neighbors pieced together patterns the family above ignored. Fear and curiosity blended into a subtle, growing tension, a collective unease that hovered over the city like heat over asphalt. And yet, the cook remained untouchable. Every bite served, every chore completed, reinforced her invisibility. To the world, she was just another worker. To herself, she was a master of a silent, terrifying network of secrets. The whispers of Atlanta never reached their full crescendo, but they were enough to hint that something was wrong, enough to make certain eyes linger a little longer, certain ears strain for news. The cook moved through this web of suspicion undetected, her secret intact, her control absolute. And in that quiet, unspoken fear, the stage was set for the unraveling that would eventually shock the household, and the city itself to its core. Every secret has a tipping point. For the Pryor Street household, it came not with a shout, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible slip. A missing person was noticed, a meal tasted off in a way that couldn't be ignored, and suddenly the delicate balance that had protected the cook for years began to crumble. Panic replaced complacency, and suspicion sharpened like a blade. The family's confidence evaporated. Guests whispered among themselves. Servants exchanged nervous glances. Fear, which had been confined to the shadows of the kitchen, now reached the parlors and dining rooms. Every corner of the house carried a new tension, a silent question. Could it be true? And through it all, the cook watched. She had survived this long by reading the currents of fear, but now, the currents began to surge against her. The breaking point arrived in the form of a revelation no one could ignore. A visitor, perhaps a curious neighbor, or a perceptive servant noticed something in the meals, something that didn't belong. Questions, once whispered, became pointed. Accusations hovered like storm clouds, and the household could no longer maintain its fragile calm. The cook, ever composed, now faced a challenge unlike any before. Her careful calculations had kept the secret hidden for years, but with eyes finally turning toward her, the tension thickened. Every movement, every word, carried consequences, and the line between survival and exposure had never been thinner. In that charged moment, the household teetered on the edge of revelation. The cook's carefully constructed world of control and concealment was cracking, and every glance, every whispered suspicion threatened to bring it all crashing down. For the first time in years, the invisible thread she had woven through the house trembled, and as tension mounted, the question hung in the air. How long could a secret this dark survive before it consumed everyone inside? When the truth finally surfaced, the household and eventually the city was thrown into chaos. The revelation of what had been hidden in plain sight sent shockwaves through Atlanta. Panic and disbelief collided, leaving neighbors and family members struggling to reconcile the horror. With the polished exterior of the home they thought they knew, authorities were called. And what little documentation exists hints at a frenzied investigation. Witnesses offered fragmented accounts, some exaggerated, some factual. The cook, once invisible, was now the center of a terrifying storm. Fear mingled with fascination as people tried to understand how a single individual could manipulate circumstances for such prolonged, sinister ends, and yet, much of the truth remained obscured. Buried under layers of silence and social fear, the trial, if it can be called that, was chaotic and incomplete. Records are scarce, and what survives is fragmented and uneasy mix of fact, rumor, and deliberate omission. The household tried to contain the scandal, protecting reputations while grappling with their own shock. Neighbors gossiped, but the fear of social backlash and legal repercussions kept many silent. The cook, once unseen, became a figure both feared and mythologized. Yet even as the proceedings unfolded, much of the story remained untold. Questions lingered and whispers persisted, suggesting that the full scope of the horror might never be fully acknowledged. In the aftermath, silence settled like dust over the household. The scandal was contained, but the terror lingered in memory and rumor. The cook disappeared from the records, leaving only fragments of testimony, hushed gossip, and a chilling legacy. What the city of Atlanta never fully faced was the uncomfortable truth. Some horrors are easier to bury than confront, and some secrets, no matter how monstrous, can survive decades simply because no one dares to tell the full story. One of the most frustrating and haunting aspects of this story is how easily it slipped through history's cracks. Official records from mid-19th century Atlanta are incomplete, scattered, or deliberately destroyed. Court documents, personal letters, and newspaper accounts offer only glimpses, often contradictory, leaving historians to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. The cook herself disappears from the paper trail entirely. We know her through fragments mentioned in witness statements, passing references in letters, and the faint echo of rumor. Each fragment hints at a complex figure, terrified, clever, desperate, and terrifyingly resourceful. It raises a question that haunts every historian and storyteller. How many stories like hers have been lost to time, erased by indifference, fear, or the deliberate silencing of uncomfortable truths? What remains tells a story shaped as much by omission as by fact. Newspapers at the time skirted details, perhaps unwilling to report such a grotesque crime in a city trying to maintain its image. Personal diaries hint at unease, but rarely confront the horror directly, and the cook whose actions define the case was rendered almost invisible, a ghost in the historical record. Yet, even in these fragments, her agency shines through. She was more than a victim of circumstance. She was a strategist, navigating cruelty, fear, and secrecy with chilling precision. And in that, the horror of the story endures. The lost records leave gaps that may never be filled, but they also amplify the story's power. What survives is enough to glimpse the impossible courage, cunning, and terror contained in one kitchen, one household, one city. The cook's deeds, hidden for decades, force us to confront uncomfortable truths about history, who gets remembered, who is erased, and how easily horror can be concealed behind polite facades. Her story lingers, haunting the spaces between the recorded facts. The story of the cook of Pryor Street is more than a tale of horror. It's a mirror reflecting the world she inhabited. In a city built on wealth, power, and systemic oppression, the invisible could wield influence in terrifying ways. Her actions challenge us to reconsider what survival meant, what desperation could drive, and how history chooses which voices to preserve. Even today, her story lingers on the edges of memory. Researchers and historians chase fragments, piecing together a narrative almost entirely erased. Each discovery evokes awe, disbelief, and a chilling sense of wonder at the lengths one person went to navigate a world stacked against her. And yet, there's a lesson hidden in the shadows. What is forgotten can still echo, shaping the way we understand both past and present. The echoes of her story ripple beyond Atlanta, beyond history books, into our collective imagination. They remind us that survival can take forms we might never anticipate, and that power can exist in unexpected places, even in the hands of someone society tried to render invisible. Her story is uncomfortable, haunting, and morally complex, forcing us to grapple with questions that have no easy answers. How far can desperation push a person? How do we remember the powerless when their actions defy neat categorization? In this way, the cook's legacy endures, a whisper in the corridors of history that refuses to be silenced. Ultimately, the cook of Pryor Street reminds us that history is never just about dates or names. It's about the lives lived in between, the choices made under impossible circumstances, and the secrets buried beneath polite facades. Her story, terrifying and unforgettable, continues to echo, urging us to remember the silenced, question the recorded, and confront the shadows that history often prefers to hide. Some stories refuse to stay buried, and this is one of them.